Hey there, boring history fans. Welcome back to another dive into the past that's anything but dull. Today, we're stepping into a world where winter wasn't just a season. It was a force of nature that could make or break you. Picture England centuries ago, gripped by the Little Ice Age, a time when the cold wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a relentless enemy that tested every ounce of human grit. No central heating, no grocery stores, no Netflix to keep you cozy. Just you, a smoky fire, and a world frozen solid. Could you survive it? That's what we're exploring today, and trust me, it's a tale of struggle, ingenuity, and a surprising amount of fun. So bundle up, and let's transport ourselves to a frosty medieval village where survival was a daily battle. Imagine waking up in the year 1350, your breath visible in the air, your fingers half numb before you even get out of bed. The Little Ice Age, stretching from roughly 1300 to 1850, wasn't a full-blown ice age with glaciers swallowing towns, but it was a serious climatic shift. Winters dragged on, colder and harsher than anything you'd want to endure, while summers were short, cool, and often drenched in rain. This wasn't just a bad week of weather. It was centuries of unpredictable, brutal conditions that turned England's already moody climate into a survival challenge. Before this, the medieval warm period had folks growing vineyards as far north as Newcastle, living the good life by medieval standards. But when the Little Ice Age hit, it was like nature decided to crank the air conditioning to Arctic levels. You're in a small village now, and life is nothing like today. Your house, if you're a peasant, is a drafty hovel made of wattle and daub, woven sticks plastered with mud, clay, and straw. Sounds rustic, right? Until you realize the wind cuts through it like a knife. The walls are thin, the gaps are plenty, and the cold seeps in no matter how hard you try to keep it out. Some houses are better built, with tightly packed walls and snug thatched roofs. But if you're stuck with a shoddy one, good luck. Your only defense is a fire in the center of the room, but don't picture a cozy fireplace. This is an open hearth, spewing smoke that stings your eyes and clings to your clothes. The smoke escapes through a hole in the roof if you're lucky. Otherwise, you're living in a haze that makes breathing a chore. If you're one of the wealthy few, you're in a stone house or maybe even a small castle. Sounds grand, but stone is a terrible insulator. Your home feels like a refrigerator, and no amount of fancy tapestries can change that. You've got braziers, metal containers filled with hot coals, that you move from room to room for warmth. Handy but risky. One wrong move, and your prized possessions are up in flames. Windows? Forget about it. Glass is a rare luxury, so most openings are just holes in the wall, covered with wooden shutters or flimsy paper that does little to stop the drafts. Whether you're a peasant coughing through smoke or a lord dodging fire hazards, staying warm is a constant struggle. The cold didn't just make you shiver, it made growing food a nightmare. The Little Ice Age shortened the growing season, leaving crops like wheat and barley struggling to ripen. Early frosts could kill young plants, and late springs delayed planting. Heavy rains turned fields into swamps, and hailstorms could flatten a harvest in minutes. When crops failed, food became scarce, prices soared, and hunger loomed like a shadow. Livestock weren't spared either. Farmers relied on hay and straw to feed their animals through winter, but wet summers meant moldy, useless fodder. Without enough feed, cows stopped giving milk, sheep lost weight, and entire herds could die, leaving farmers with empty barns and emptier stomachs. But it wasn't just about staying warm or fed. It was about keeping society from falling apart. The Little Ice Age didn't just test individuals. It tested communities, economies, and even folklore. Stories like Hansel and Gretel, with their themes of famine and desperation, were born from times like these, when the forest wasn't just a spooky backdrop. It was a place people turned to for survival, scavenging whatever they could find. As we step out of this frozen village and into the daily grind of survival, let's see how people kept their pantries stocked and their spirits high in a world that seemed determined to freeze them out. Now, let's zoom in on what it took to make it through a single day in this icy world. You're up before dawn, the cold biting at your fingers as you stoke the fire. If you're a peasant, your home is a one-room affair, And that smoky hearth is your lifeline. It's not just for warmth. It's where you cook, where you gather light, and where you huddle with your family, maybe even your livestock, to share what little heat there is. The animals, if you've brought them inside, add warmth but also chaos. The air is thick with the smell of smoke, damp straw, and animals, and you're coughing as much as you're breathing. The fire burns whatever you can find. Wood, peat, even dried dung. But it's never enough to chase the cold away completely. If you're wealthy, your stone house is sturdier, but it's no picnic. Stone walls hold the cold like a sponge, and your grand hall feels more like a crypt than a home. You've got those braziers we talked about, carting them from room to keep the chill at bay. But they're a fire hazard, and you're constantly on edge, knowing one stray spark could burn your manor down. Windows are a problem too. No glass for most, just openings covered with shutters or oiled paper that let in drafts like an unwelcome guest. Even the elite shivered, just with better furniture and fancier problems. Food was where the real battle was fought. The shorter growing seasons meant crops didn't have time to mature. Wheat, barley, oats, these were the backbone of your diet, but they needed warmth and time to grow. When spring came late or autumn arrived early, your harvest was pitiful, if it survived at all. Heavy rains could drown your fields, leaving seeds to rot in the soil. Hailstorms were another menace, flattening crops in minutes. When harvests failed, food prices shot up, and the poor, who spent most of their income on bread, were left with nothing. Livestock faced their own struggles. Wet summers meant soggy hay and straw, which molded and became useless. Without enough fodder, animals starved, and farmers lost not just food but the muscle power needed to plow fields. Getting food to market was another headache. Rivers and canals were the highways of the medieval world, moving grain and livestock from farms to towns. But when winter hit, those waterways froze solid, sometimes for months. Boats were stuck, and towns like London or York, which relied on river trade, faced shortages. Prices for what little food remained skyrocketed, and the poor were hit hardest. Overland travel was no better. Muddy roads and snowdrifts made carts nearly impossible to move. For many, a frozen river meant an empty pantry, and you had to make do with whatever you'd managed to stockpile. But humans are nothing if not clever, and medieval folks were masters at stretching what they had. Food preservation was an art form born of necessity. Pickling was a go-to. Vegetables like cucumbers or onions were soaked in vinegar or brine to keep bacteria at bay. Smoking meat and fish dried them out and added flavor, making them last for months. Drying was simple but effective. Fruits, herbs, and vegetables were left in the sun or wind to remove moisture, turning them into portable snacks. Brining meat in salty water was perfect for things like corned beef, while grains were stored in ceramic pots to keep out pests and dampness. Milk was turned into cheese, butter, or yogurt, which could last far longer than fresh milk. Water was another puzzle. Wells were reliable if you had one, but not every village did. Rivers were great when they weren't frozen or polluted, and in winter, melted snow was a handy source. In cities, though, clean water was hard to come by. Sewage often contaminated supplies, so many turned to ale, not because they were looking for a buzz, but because it was safer than drinking from a questionable stream. It wasn't exactly a health food craze, but it kept you hydrated and added a bit of cheer to those long, dark winters. The ingenuity didn't stop there. People found ways to keep their spirits up, even when the cold was relentless. As we move from the practical side of survival to the human side, let's explore how communities held together, how they found joy in the frost, and how they faced one of the darkest chapters of this era, the Great Famine. Life in the Little Ice Age wasn't just about staying warm or fed. It was about holding on to hope when the world seemed determined to crush it. You're in that same village, and every day is a test of your wits. Your home, whether it's a flimsy peasant hut or a chilly stone manor, is a constant reminder of the cold's grip. The fire is your lifeline, but it's a smoky, temperamental one, filling your home with haze and barely keeping the chill at bay. The wealthy might have braziers and tapestries, but they're still shivering, dodging drafts from shuttered windows and praying their heaters don't start a fire. Food was the heart of the struggle. The shorter growing seasons meant crops like wheat and barley didn't have time to ripen. Early frosts could kill young plants, while late springs delayed planting. Heavy rains turned fields into swamps, and hailstorms could destroy a harvest in minutes. When crops failed, prices soared, and the poor were left with empty pantries. Livestock were hit hard too. Wet summers meant moldy hay and straw, leaving animals hungry and weak. Without enough fodder, cows stopped producing milk, and sheep didn't survive the winter, leaving farmers with little to fall back on. Transportation was another victim of the cold. Rivers and canals, the lifelines of medieval trade, froze solid in winter, halting the flow of goods. Towns and cities that relied on river trade faced shortages, and prices for what little food remained skyrocketed. Overland travel was no better. Muddy roads and snowdrifts made it nearly impossible to move goods. For urban dwellers, this could mean weeks without fresh supplies, forcing them to rely on whatever they'd stockpiled or whatever they could afford. To keep food on the table, people got ingenious. Pickling vegetables in vinegar or brine kept them fresh for months. Smoking meat and fish dried them out and added flavor, making them last longer. Drying fruits, herbs, and vegetables was a simple but effective way to remove moisture and prevent spoilage. Brining meat in salty water was perfect for preserving things like corned beef. Grains were stored in ceramic pots to keep out pests and dampness, while milk was turned into cheese, butter, or yogurt. These methods were critical, turning perishable food into winter staples. Water was a constant challenge. Wells were reliable but not always available, and rivers could be frozen or polluted. In winter, melted snow was a handy source, but in cities, clean water was scarce. Sewage often contaminated supplies, so many turned to ale, which was safer thanks to fermentation. It wasn't a health drink, but it kept you hydrated and added a bit of cheer to the gloom. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 was a brutal reminder of how fragile life was. Relentless rains drowned crops, and a cattle disease wiped out up to 80% of livestock. People resorted to eating grass, roots, and tree bark, none of which were nutritious. In extreme cases, there were reports of cannibalism, as starvation pushed people to the edge. The famine killed 10 to 15% of the population in some areas, leaving communities devastated. It also fueled anger at leaders like King Edward II, who were seen as ineffective, sparking unrest and exposing the cracks in medieval society. But even in the darkest times, people found ways to keep going. Communities shared resources, helping the vulnerable, widows, orphans, the elderly survive. Winter also brought moments of joy. Snowball fights were a village-wide affair, with kids and adults joining in. Sledding on wooden boards was a thrill, and ice skating, using polished bones as blades, turned frozen ponds into playgrounds. Indoors, storytelling was a lifeline, with tales of heroes and monsters keeping spirits high. Games like chess or dice provided entertainment, and frozen rivers became ice markets, where traders set up stalls and communities gathered to trade and socialize. As we leave the shadow of the famine and step into the lighter moments of winter, let's see how people turned hardship into opportunity, finding ways to laugh and connect in a world of ice. The Little Ice Age wasn't just a test of survival, it was a test of the human spirit. You're still in that village, fighting the same battles against the cold and hunger. Your home, whether it's a drafty hut or a stone manor, is a constant reminder of the challenge. The fire keeps you alive, but it's a smoky, inefficient lifeline. The wealthy might have braziers and better walls, but they're still at the mercy of the cold, dodging drafts and fire hazards in their chilly halls. Food remained the biggest hurdle. Shorter growing seasons meant crops struggled to mature, and heavy rains could drown your fields overnight. Livestock were hit just as hard, with moldy fodder leading to starvation and loss. Frozen rivers cut off trade, leaving towns scrambling for supplies. Yet, people found ways to preserve what they had. Pickling, smoking, drying, and brining turned perishable food into winter staples. Water was scarce, especially in cities, but ale kept people hydrated, adding a bit of warmth to those dark winters. The Great Famine was a low point, but it wasn't the whole story. People didn't just survive. They found ways to thrive. Communities banded together, sharing food and resources to help the vulnerable. Winter also brought moments of joy. Snowball fights turned villages into battlegrounds of laughter. Sledding was a thrill for all ages, and ice skating on bone blades was a medieval marvel. Indoors, storytelling kept spirits high, with tales of heroes and monsters passed down by firelight. Games like chess or dice added friendly competition, and ice markets on frozen rivers became hubs of trade and socializing. The Little Ice Age showed the resilience of human communities. They didn't just endure the cold. They found ways to laugh, play, and support each other. As we wrap up this frozen journey, let's reflect on what it all means and why it still matters today. So, here we are at the end of our chilly adventure through the Little Ice Age. We've shivered in drafty huts, battled hunger, and skated on frozen ponds with bones strapped to our boots. This wasn't just a cold snap. It was a centuries-long test of human endurance, ingenuity, and spirit. From the smoky fires of peasant homes to the brazier-lit halls of the wealthy, everyone faced the same relentless cold. Failed crops, frozen rivers, and the Great Famine pushed society to the brink. But people didn't give up. They pickled, smoked, and dried their way through winter, shared resources, and found joy in snowball fights and ice markets. What does this tell us? The Little Ice Age is a reminder that humans are tougher than the toughest storms. It's about resilience, community, and finding light in the darkest winters. Could you have survived it? No Wi-Fi, no central heating, just you and your wits against the frost. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear how you'd fare. If you enjoyed this journey through the frozen past, hit that like button, subscribe to Boring History, and ring the bell for more stories that make history anything but boring. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.